First of all, a lot of people, when you talk to them, they say, well, I'm not a leader. And what they don't realize is everybody's a leader. Hitler was a leader, not a good one, but he was a leader. Eeyore the donkey, one of my favorite little characters from the cartoons, is always leading everybody into sadness. Everyone is leading people somewhere. And so when you think of yourself, if you tend to think, well, I'm not a leader, I would suggest to you that you are. You are. And the beginning of changing your mind is to ask yourself, where are you going? What are you doing? Even if all you do is, and I know you don't do this, but if a person did nothing but get up in the morning and sit on the couch all day and eat chips and watch TV, you're teaching somebody that this is how life is to be lived. So all of us are taking people somewhere. What are you about? What is your direction? And sometimes the easiest way to get back on track at work or at home when there's a mess, and we all know that unfortunate, unpleasant things develop in all sorts of situations of life, is just stop and ask yourself, what are we trying to do here? What are we about? This happens to me more at home than at church, but it does happen to me at church where some young person, and of course mine aren't really young anymore, but there's something that's happened and you just think, oh my goodness, what do you do with that? And it's hard to find the answer, but if you remember the direction you're going and put one foot in front of the other, all of us are going somewhere, so we're all leaders. One of the most important things that I will tell you about leaders is they must gain the trust of the people that they're trying to lead. If you can't do that, then your leadership is not going to be a constructive thing. And I would tell you that no one can make you a leader. This is a fallacy of modern thought, that we're going to hire a manager and he's going to lead the team, or we're going to hire a boss and he's going to lead the department. No one can make you someone's leader. You don't really become a leader until you gain the trust of the people in your circle. When we talk about this with other pastors, we talk about the interesting phenomena that the bishop can assign you somewhere and say, you're their pastor. They can go out and paint your name on the sign in the front, you can wear a robe and a cross and all of that, but you're never someone's pastor until they tell you that you're their pastor. And you're never someone's, well, you might be their boss, but you will never be their mentor until you treat them in a way that endears them to you. So leadership is more than just being in charge. It's much more than I'm in charge. I'm large and in charge. Leadership develops as we create and strengthen the relationships with the people around us. I think we talked about that. Okay. How do we gain trust? Trust is an interesting word. I think there are steps we can take that build trust. The first one is clarity. What is it we're about? Ask somebody where they're going. Hopefully they can give you an answer. If they can't give you an answer, not sure that we're going to follow that. Somebody wants to know what Jeff thinks is important at church. I can tell you the things that I think are important. And I think part of the way we clarify that isn't just by me telling you that, but it's about me doing that. It's not enough, frankly, for us to tell people what's important. You have to model what's important. You have to show them what's important. I've always believed in church work days, so I try to show up for them and participate. I believe in hospitality. I believe in wearing my name tag, which isn't there right now. One of the reasons that I go around on Sunday morning and shake hands is because I want other people to see that and understand that that's an important thing. They told us in seminary, don't ever expect your people to be committed givers to anything if you're not. That's one of the reasons why when we have capital funds drives, and boy aren't those fun, that the pastor always has to stand up and say, well, my gift to the campaign is blah, and everybody's like curling up in the chair, and you really want to curl up in a chair, but it's about setting the example. It's about not just saying this is what we're going to do, but showing them that you are actually wanting to do this. I believe that we gain trust with people by behaving in a humble manner. And my friend Joy Steincross always goes crazy when the word humility pops up in church, because she says we were all just squished down with that so much when we were young. Be humble, be nice, be good. And I'm really not talking about an idea of humility that should crush your heart or make you feel small or little. It's simply a matter of there's a human characteristics that happen to people that get in leadership positions that sometimes they like to be seen, and I'm going to come down here and stand on a chair. We've all known leaders that their whole posture in life is just kind of like this. Look at me. Aren't I great? Aren't I the greatest thing? Don't ever tell anybody I said that, because what is your natural reaction to that? And I'm going to go back up here because I think they're taping this. But when you're in a setting where somebody is making a presentation or there's someone that's involved in the team, and their posture to you is look at me. I'm the one. I'm special. Don't people naturally just fall away from that? And so when I talk about humility, it's not that you have to crush your heart and be some little worm. It's just don't let it be about you. People can smell stuff. They can smell when it's becoming about you. And my dad always told me the need for attention is a sure sign of insecurity. Don't ever blow your own horn. It doesn't sound right. I had a professor in seminary that had a famous story that he called the bank walkers. And I attended several of his classes over my time in seminary, and every time he would tell the story, I would smile and watch the people that were hearing it for the first time, because it's a bit shocking in some way. That's why I couldn't tell it on Sunday morning, but I'll tell it on Sunday night. So now I've made it sound worse than it probably is. And this is a story of posturing in life and how we carry ourselves. He said that when he was young, they didn't have swimming pools, and so they all swam at the farm, at the pond at the farm. And of course, the clothes you had were the clothes you were wearing were the only clothes you had. So when you got to the pond, you'd get behind a tree and take off your clothes, and you'd get in the pond and swim around, right? And of course, it was always just guys. I guess the girls had their own pond. But he said there was always somebody that needed to get out and walk around, okay? Just so everybody else could see them. And he called these people the bank walkers. He said, you're going to run into people in life that always feel like they've got to prove something to you about who they are and what they are. He said, stay in the water. If you've got something going on, God will bless you. God will use it. You never have to act like you're something special. It just leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. So we survived that story. How do we gain trust? We gain trust by caring about people. And one of the things that I may say repeatedly tonight is there are some things about leadership that if you're not good at, work on getting good at them. And this is definitely one of them. If you are someone that naturally shies away from others, if you are one that might have a more stern tone by your nature, begin to work on the personal characteristics and skills that it takes to be a caring person. I think people can tell right away. Can't we tell when we're with somebody and they're telling us something, but you have a feeling that they don't really care about you? One of the things I love about being on staff here is we've created an environment, and our folks work very hard, but if somebody's having a bad day, if somebody has a heartache, we totally encourage them to spend a little bit of time talking to another staff person. I have on many occasions run into a staff person, and you can tell they just have a heartache, they have a heartbreak, And if I felt like I could talk to them, I said, come on, let's go talk. But if I didn't, I'd go find someone else and say, well, you go down here and get a hold of so-and-so because they need to talk. And the ability to create a culture where you work, where people know they're cared about. This is top secret, so don't repeat this, but my wife is changing jobs. She's been at the company that she's at for 5 years, and over the last year and a half, as the economy got more difficult, the company has worked to squeeze more and more out of each employee. And you know that only goes so far. You can't get blood out of a turnip. You can't get blood out of a person either. She went from traveling 3 days a week to 4 and then 5. They had a matrix of 6 visits a month, then 8, now 10. They cut so many expenses that it hurt the morale to the extent that my wife, who's a very dedicated person, you can only do so much. So one of the greatest things you can do for your people is to care about them. And the folks that work here at the church will be honest, and they'll tell you that sometimes Jeff asks a lot of us, or Jeff expects a lot. If you want to have the ability to draw the best of your people and ask them to come in early or stay late or whatever it is, you're going to be much more successful at that if they know that you care about them. We build trust by collaboration. Sometimes people in charge, sometimes the leaders think, I'm the one that knows, and so it's my job to tell. And while everything cannot be done by a team approach, it is important that people have a sense that they are on a team, that they have the opportunity for participation and dialogue. And you may have a rule at your office or your place of work where you have to make the final decision, but folks ought to be able to share with you, whether they agree or not, with what you're doing. Sometimes the best advice that I get as a leader is from another staff person that says, you want to do what? And why is that? And good leaders take that in and think about it. A really good book on leadership is Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. And in this book, he talks about getting the right people on the right seat on the bus. And a problem that organizations have, a problem that churches have, a problem that ministries in churches have, is sometimes we take the first warm body that comes along. And all of a sudden you have all kinds of people that are doing things and have all sorts of authority and responsibility, but they may not have the accompanying gifts to do that. Imagine somebody that won't ever look you in the eye being on the hospitality team, and you'd want to say, hey, look up, lift up your chin, learn how to do this. You've got to look us in the eye. When we are building the team, it's very important to find people that get what it is that you're trying to do. And if they don't, try to help them. Sit them down, spend time with them, teach them the things that they need to learn to be successful. A lot of times people are never successful in an endeavor because they were expected to perform at such a high level coming out of the gate, and no one took the time along the way to mentor them. Unfortunately, if you want to have a successful organization too, if you find that you cannot train or help that person, sometimes you have to say, I'm not sure this is the best fit for you, and let's try this over here. And there again, the last point on this slide. Some of these things, if they don't come naturally to you, learn how to do them. We talked about this in the sermon last week about how we learn to do things that might not naturally be a part of who we are. And the first thing I would tell you is get a book to read. I mean, if you want to learn about being a more loving person, get a book about love and read that and try to take that in. And the second thing we mentioned last week was never just read the book. Never let the information go in one ear and out the other, but find a way to digest it and retain it. I have a book that I picked up about 6 years ago called Walking on Water by Anthony DeMello, and the first time I read it, I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh, the things in this book I have to learn. There was some pictures of his life paradigm that I said, oh my goodness, I have to take these things in. Things that helped me feel more confident in God's love. And I don't even know how to explain it, but I knew at that moment I couldn't just read it and put it down. And I've carried that book with me for a number of years, and we've given lots of copies of that away. To learn skills that are new to us, we have to find ways to digest the information, not just read something and let it pass through. The third thing is to find a mentor and spend time with them, learn from them. I had lunch years ago with a wonderful gal in our church, and I think I've known her for many years, but we'd never had lunch. And we sat down for lunch one day, and I opened the conversation with, so tell me, how did you get to be this way? And you know, she didn't have to ask me what I meant. She knew what I meant. I was asking her about the kind of person that she was, and she's just an exceptional person. And she was like she was ready for the question. She said two things. First of all, I had wonderful parents. I was raised in a wonderful, loving, nurturing home, and I thought, that would have been nice. Isn't that awesome, you know? Not that my parents didn't love me, but they were Germans, you know? But the other thing she said was, I've had some great mentors along the way. In your field, look at the people that know what to do and get a hold of them. There are pastors that I meet with once a month that I want to learn what they do. I want to figure out how their brain works. So we gain trust through being clear about our vision. Where are we going? I have a lot of questions from people from time to time about the vision for our church. And it's different in a church than in the business world, because in the business world, you know, if we sell tires, we know what our cost per tire is, and we know how many tires we need to sell and where our market is, and we know how many salesmen we're going to need, and there's this kind of business plan that develops that has lots of numbers to it. Sometimes churches try to do that, and in fact, when I came to the church in 1994, I found in the files a report of a study group who had spent, I think, 12 weeks studying Ken Callahan's 10 Keys to an Effective Church. And I read through the report, and it was very interesting, and it came up with this plan that was never implemented because it's very difficult for churches to execute a business plan the way a nuts and bolts or tires hard sell object a business might be able to do. Same for a home. You know, if you're talking about leadership in your family, it's hard to set a 1, 3, and a 5-year plan. Maybe you can do that with savings or savings for college or something like that. But if I sat my kids down and said, here's my 1, 3, and 5-year plan for you, I'm not sure I would survive the incident. But vision, definitely, you've got to be able to explain to people where you've been and where you're trying to go. Rick Warren, in his book, The Purpose-Driven Church, describes a vision not as a 5-year plan, but as making the most of the opportunities around you, using the resources at hand to make the most of the opportunities around you. As that plays out for us at church, the way I would tell you about our vision is we are always looking to overcome the next obstacle, because whatever it is that you're involved with, there are obstacles. There are things that are going to come along. I hope that one day the size of this room becomes an obstacle to us. We're talking about splitting this service at 10:10 and having 2 in here in the fall. I hope someday in the future to have 3. But somewhere along the line, I hope the size of this room is an obstacle to our growth. And when that happens, you know what we're going to be talking about? Kicking out the wall and making the room bigger, and everybody's going to be so excited about another capital funds drive. But vision means identifying your obstacles and working to eliminate them. If you look back at the history of our church, we have a just very interesting timeline of decisions that we made to add parking, to add space. I remember when we moved into this building, how many new hymnals did we buy, Bill? Just always trying to look to do the thing that opened the opportunity for what tomorrow was. We gain trust by finding success, and this is kind of painful because not everyone finds success, and there are a lot of people that I know in ministry that are great people, that are great preachers and just wonderful people that I love dearly, that always seem to struggle from place to place, and I don't know how to figure that out. But I do know that we gain trust with people by having a track record of success. If you are in a Stephen minister, or you're going to go visit a friend at the hospital and you have a disastrous hospital visit and you're rude or short, or you sit on the bed and you make their scar hurt and they go, oh, the next time you want to come, they're not going to be real excited about a visit from Jeff Brinkman. And I call that, in terms of successful leadership, don't shoot yourself in the foot. If you want to be a leader wherever you're at, you've got to make sure that we're not behaving in ways that shoot ourselves in the foot. When I was in Princeton, which is in North Missouri, I was there for 3 years, and followed by a very nice pastor, a very nice man, who stood up on his first Sunday there and said, hello, my name is so-and-so, I'm your new pastor. You don't get to announce you're someone's leader. They tell you when they trust you. I'm your new pastor. I just want to let you know that I really didn't want to bring my family up to North Missouri. Now, how do you think that went for that guy? Not very well. He shot himself in the foot. Another thing that we do that breaks a pattern of success is we drop the ball. We tell people we're going to do something, and then we don't follow through. And I will tell you, sadly, that does happen at the church sometimes, but we've worked very intentionally to overcome that. Some of you will remember years and years ago, when we just moved into the new sanctuary, we would have a Sunday where we would talk to people about ways we needed them to help, ways we needed them to serve. And at the end of the service, we would split up into 4 groups, and this was a chance to respond to the message. And if you wanted to join the landscape team, you'd go over there. And if you wanted to join some other team, you'd go over there, and people would sign up. Well, sometimes people were signing up for things, and they weren't getting called back. There's nothing more demoralizing than offering your services and finding out that nobody's going to call you back. You start to wonder, do I even matter? And there are a lot of ways in our business life and personal lives that we don't complete the circle. That's why on Sunday morning, if you say to me, hey, listen, I really need to talk to you. I really want to have a cup of coffee. I really want to have lunch. I said, great. I used to say, I'll call you. And you know what? At the end of the day, I go home and I think, okay, what service was it? Who was that person? And I can't remember. And it's a personality flaw. I don't know. So I've stopped telling people, I will call you. I say, great. You want to have coffee? That's great. Send me an email. And then I follow through and complete that. You don't need me to explain what it means to complete the circle, but people trust you when they know you're going to follow through, and they like to work with people that they know are going to take it all the way and not leave them hanging. There is this thing that I call the reservoir of success, the reservoir of goodwill. And this is an idea that came to me from, I believe Janice Smith is her name. Her husband Clarence plays the drums sometimes. Janice put together a presentation for schools and was talking about leadership. And one of the things that she said is, when you're doing the right things and people look and see that things are going well, you build a reservoir of goodwill. So maybe you have someone that works with you or for you, and you're not sure if you can trust them, but you watch them, and over time things are going well. So now when you give them a task, you're really not worried because they have such a reservoir of goodwill. We build trust by a track record of success. Conversely, if we begin to do things and everything is going wrong, everyone will question what you're doing. You come into the room with an idea, they're going, oh no, here comes Brinkman. He's the guy that had the idea about that. So learn to make decisions and lead folks in the direction that build and lead to success, because they will become more trusting of you. I'm open to questions. I don't just mean tonight, but anytime. If you want to ask about the church and what we're doing and why we're doing it, I'm open to that. We get very few questions. Very few people come and they say, we want to know what's going on. When I first came here, I had a lot of questions. Who are you? What are you doing? How are you going to integrate to our system? How's this going to go? Over time, when people see that things are going well, they tend to want to be more trusting of what's going on. Okay. Leaders understand the need for change. If you're alive, things change, don't they? Nothing stays the same. It just doesn't. And if there's anything that we've learned in the last 12 years being out here on this property, is that if you're going to get to where you need to be, you've got to respond to what's going on, and there are going to be lots of changes. This is kind of painful to us humans. We don't like change. My preference is that things just always stay the same. Think of the little pastor-centered church, where there's a pastor and he gets up on Sunday and he just has to preach one sermon, and he knows everybody in the congregation and where they live, and everybody knows what everybody's doing, and everybody all serves on the same boards and stuff. If that church ever grows, everything changes. And whether you're talking about your family or your business or the church, our goal is to reach more, do more, expand our operation. Leading means understanding that there's going to be change. We talked about the person that sits on the couch and leads people to just sit on the couch. Most leading that we understand that's healthy involves action. We're trying to go from here to there, and there are a gazillion things that have to change along the way. One of the things that is so difficult sometimes about change is you're looking at something and you're trying to anticipate what's going to come, and you work with the people and try to help them understand what's going to happen, and then when it actually happens, it's different. And you have to go back and work with those people and explain what you were trying to do. But leaders need to understand that there's going to be change, especially in a large organization. When we moved out to this building, we had all of our leaders, everybody that we could put this book into their hands, a book by Alice Mann called Managing Transitions in Church Size. And one of the stories that she told was about how if you get on an elevator and it's just you and one other person, your opportunities for configuration on the elevator are you and them. You're on their left or you're on their right. It's pretty simple. You bring in 3 or 4 people, and all of a sudden there's like 16 ways that you all can stand together. Well, you get 100 people on the elevator, and the system becomes absolutely confusing. And if you've been a part of a smaller church, or if you remember what it was like being over in the old building, we kind of hung around, everybody knew everybody. Now you come to this place, and you can wander through the foyer and see people and not know a single one. So coming to grips with the sense of fear and worry that people have about change is a very important thing for leaders to be able to do. I mentioned this book in church today. In fact, when we had our series on Exodus in June, I talked a little bit about this. But William Bridges talks about change in 3 stages, and he's not particularly a Christian writer that I'm aware of, but in his book he talks about change, and he uses the example of the Exodus, and that change is a 3-part thing. Part 1 is getting people interested in leaving where they're at. And of course, that's always the hardest thing. I remember when Kathy and I we got married, and we were going to go on our honeymoon, or maybe we were planning a wedding and I was trying to get time off for the honeymoon, and the boss said, I'm sorry, no one can take off that week because we're having a computer a changeover, right? What do you call it? All of the old system out, new system in. Well, I really don't care about his computer system, and I really don't care about where he's trying to take this organization. I have my own agenda, and it does involve being gone on a honeymoon. So getting people to leave the old is one of the most difficult parts of change. Well, Moses finally gets them willing to leave and out of Egypt, and immediately there's problems. There's unhappiness. We're in uncharted territory. We're in the neutral zone. And you know this is true anytime we change anything, because we have moved into a place where we've never been before. Years ago, I ran Macintosh computers, and when the church finally got email and they all were using IBM, I had to give that up. Well, it took me months, maybe a year. And you know, our young people get so smart about some of the computer things, and for years I used a paper calendar, and they would come around and make fun of me, and finally I just got tired of it, and I said, fine, teach me how to do Outlook. Well, you know, it took months. There is a neutral zone when there is change going on. It's the in-between time. It's the time when people are the most fearful and the most uncomfortable, and they're mad at you because things are different, and they're not the way they were, and we want to go back to Egypt, and we're tired of manna, and we know you're trying to solve our problems, but this just isn't very good. Leaders need to help people be comfortable in the neutral zone, in the difficult times when things are changing. And, you know, in our personal lives, we all run into this as well. Gail Sheehy had a book some years ago, Passages. It's just about those times of life where everything's changing and you just feel crazy. One of the best things that you can do is to be a friend for someone who's going through a life passage, because they're in a neutral zone, and it's just absolutely destabilizing. Of course, part 3, embracing the new, that's the promised land. That's when people actually finally learn how to use the new software, when they finally get acclimated to the new office. And you know how this works. They beat you up for 6 months or a year about whatever the change was. But now, you know, everything's kind of done and fine, and everything's kind of chilled out. Nobody ever comes back and says, this wasn't so bad after all. They never come back and say, oh, you know, I remember when I was chewing on your leg that day and kind of pulling the hair out of the back of your head. They never apologize for any of that. Well, that's just human nature. Leaders have to know that. You've got to know that people are going to be uncomfortable, and step into it and go with it. I wish I had a glass of water. Leaders understand chaos, and they're not afraid of it. Gosh, it sure seems in the last few years that as I watch the news and read about the world, that things are less stable. And of course, every time something changes, there's this sense that life can feel very chaotic. When your kids get older and they start to drive, all of a sudden you don't know where they're at, and it feels very chaotic and frightening. We have a choice in chaotic moments. We can do what I want to do, which is find the corner and cry or complain to somebody or be unhappy, or we can collect the best of what we have in this moment and be a voice of reason. You know, the disciples are rowing across the Sea of Galilee, and a storm comes up, and Jesus is in the boat, and they're scared to death, and they wake him, and he calms the storm. Leaders are people that know how to calm the storm, who know how to get a hold of people that are absolutely nuts and help them keep their feet on the ground. Ron Richardson has a book that's here in my little book pile called Creating a Healthier Church. And of course, it's about church, but there's a story that I want to share with you that really works in life in general, in the home or the workplace. And he's talking about electrical lines. Over by my house, there are some electrical lines that are like, I mean, the poles are this big around, just amazing poles. And if you have driven up 470 near Raytown Road, they're getting ready to put in some massive, thank you so much. You know, I said I would love to have a glass of water. I didn't think anyone would actually go get it. Thank you. Giant electrical poles. And you know what happens if you ever get a hold of one of those? Not the pole, I mean, but the wires. I mean, it's curtains. Had a funeral when I was pastoring in Oklahoma for a guy that was building a fence around a transformer, and he took one of the 20-foot top rails, and he had the wrong end. He needed the male or female or whatever, and he, instead of turning it around this way, he lifted the pole up and contacted that wire, and God bless him. He's in heaven with Jesus. So anyway, sometimes when change comes and people are in the neutral zone, they are really electrified. There is a lot of tension in their hearts, in their life, in the room, in the church, in the place of business. And Richardson says that leaders need to be like a transformer. In the old days, before power was underground, or maybe you live in a place, well, maybe the church has a transformer out here on the pole, but there'd be the big lines that came into the transformer, you know, and if a squirrel gets on top of that, you'd hear a pop and a little burned thing falls to the ground. But the transformer takes the high power and turns it into power that's useful in the building. This is what leaders need to do. Instead of reacting and being angry to the tension that you feel from people, and that's probably always going to be our first thought, is that we're uncomfortable or upset by someone else being upset. Instead of reacting to that, see it for what it is. They are massively electrified, tense about the situation. Find a way to step in and get a hold of that, and to get a hold of them, because there's this caring thing. People so need to be cared about, especially when they're unhappy. Get a hold of them and their tension, and find a way to turn that into a level of energy that can be plugged into the system in a positive way. One of the tools that I use here at the church to do this is, if I hear that, and Kathy Christensen, I'm just going to pick on you. You remember a few years ago when you complained that I always used men in the service and never used women for examples? That's because I didn't want to get in trouble with their husbands, but you know, you called me on it. So let's say Kathy Christensen's mad, and I get an email from her, or more often what happens is I'll hear from Dale, who heard from so-and-so, who heard from so-and-so, that Kathy Christensen's mad. Well, you know, we've got a lot of ways to deal with that, right? And if you don't deal with it, you know it infests your organization, because people that are angry, they talk to everybody and they tell everybody the worst of messages, and they can just be filled with a lot of pain. Well, I call these folks, and I'm going to look around the room. I think I'm safe because I don't think there's a single person here that I've ever done this to. But there are a number in our church, and I call them up and I say, "Hey, Kathy, how are you doing?" "Fine." "Kathy, I wonder if you have time to come by for a cup of coffee." "What's this about?" "Well, I just have some things I want to talk to you about." You know, if you're somebody's boss, you can do that. When you're their pastor, you have to kind of find a way to get him to come in and sit down. And so they come in and sit down, and I say, "All right, listen. I understand that you're unhappy about the children's something. Tell me. Just tell me. I love you. I want to hear what you got. Tell me." And I sit there and I listen to them. And one of two things always happens. Either I listen to them and they're right, and that has happened. And then you know what you say? You say, "You're exactly right. And you know what? We're going to fix that." And then you complete the circle, and you do. But often what happens is they only know this much of the story. And so you say, "Okay, all right, I appreciate that. Let me tell you some some more. And you tell them the backstory. You tell them what you are trying to do. You tell them what the circumstances are surrounding whatever it is. And more often than not, they go, oh, gosh. And they may not say, I'm sorry for saying those things and being that way. But their attitude will change. The other thing that's really positive about that is even if you don't agree and can't find a common ground, they know you cared enough to meet with them personally, and that says a ton. There are some people that you do this one time, and they are your friends for life. There are other people in our church that I've had coffee with many times, and finally they get tired. They know if I complain to Mia about what Dale Maxwell said, Kathy Christensen said, I'm going to end up, in there having coffee with that guy again. And we can't be offended by the pain that people feel. It's going to happen, whether it's in the home. I mean, if you're married, my goodness, the times when I react to something my wife is unhappy about, it just gets crazier. And probably the same when I'm unhappy. We've got to learn to hear people's pain and not react negatively to it. Okay, we're about out of time. Does anybody have any questions? What's the meaning of life? Did I get to go on my honeymoon? Yes. And I think, well, we finished that slide too. This is probably a good place for us to quit tonight. We did get to go on our honeymoon, and it's kind of funny, things no one knows. We went, how many of you know where Mound City, Missouri is? Look at you go. And there's a steak park there, Big Lake State Park. That's where we went. We stayed in a little cabin. We played catch with a softball and went up to Squaw Creek Reserve, where sometimes I guess eagles fly through, and that's what we did. We went to Rulo, Nebraska, and ate catfish and danced country western. So that's what we did for our honeymoon. Okay, so in my last few minutes, and someone asked, are these 2 weeks, are they the same? So go to one, or is it a continuation? I'm going to say to you, it's a continuation. We're, I assume, about halfway through of what I wanted to talk about. So I would invite you all to come back and bring your friends and your enemies. But I will appeal to you as your pastor, whether you are 16-year-old Nick Swanson sitting back there or Matt the accountant. God needs leaders in our homes, in the PTA, in our place of business. And if you're like me, the skills of leadership, we're not born with them. I mean, they don't come naturally to most people. We have to actively learn to try and figure out what needs to be done. But I want you to hear and understand that whatever your setting, whatever setting brought you here tonight, God needs leaders. Businesses desperately need people that can create a positive culture. Nervous employees need other people around. Maybe you're just a coworker, but you can be a great leader by being that person that reduces tension and cares about them and loves them. So wherever God is leading you in leadership, may you listen and follow. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for this time. I pray your blessing on each one here, upon Woods Chapel Church, upon each home represented here, each marriage, each family, and each business or nonprofit, each endeavor that these folks represent. Bless them that they might be a blessing in their setting. In Jesus' name, amen.